We live or?
We are live. At least I hope we are live. I hope people in chat will tell us. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this special episode that we kind of had it coming for a while now with Jake. The unfortunate situation is, or maybe on the other hand, fortunate situation is that my hope was that because Jake has started another one of his massive funding campaigns for Ukraine for a whole $1 million to support the Ukrainian armed forces, the hope was we're going to get this big stream and then my community was also participate and then we're going to get it done, but it's already done. So congratulations, Jake. Congratulations to everyone on your community from us. So we start this stream basically by a big celebration from everyone. Big celebration to you and huge thank you for what you're doing. And congratulations on what's this, like 3 million now that you're supported?
The first one almost hit 1.2. The next one was just over 1.1. This one's probably going to drift for another couple days. So I think by the end of this year, in total, 3.5 million fundraised with the guys at the NAFO 69th Sniffing Brigade. Yeah, unbelievable. If you had asked me a year ago, no, I wouldn't have said this was even possible.
It's really incredible. I've read on Blue Sky some people are calling you a superhero without wings, and I'm like, but I think they're mixing two concepts together. Where
Yeah, there
there's like
aren't that many
angel.
superheroes that have wings. I mean,
So
there's like Archangel or whatever, but I mean,
yes. So,
I
but
think that the expression is not all heroes wear capes.
something like this, something like this. But I'm a proud participant of your campaigns. Like I even got your. I think you did it during one of the campaigns where you signed them all manually.
There should have been one for the 1,000 Day as well, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think this is a great patch. I mean, isn't that a
It's a
nice looking patch?
it's an
I just
incredible
like
patch.
the blue and yellow with the black and white guy on the top. I like the design. They do good work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he was also on your banner in prior channels and
It's
so on.
Kirk Douglas from the movie Paths of Glory. It's from 1957. It's a Stanley Kubrick anti-war film.
We can use a little bit more of anti-war. So, Jake, welcome to our channel. On my channel, whenever I start live streaming, I always welcome my community. And I always say a huge thanks to the moderating team that really helps my channel a lot. They're doing an incredible job. They're filtering out all of the troll comments. Absolutely amazing people. So please, everyone that is watching this, either in recording or then just leave a comment, or if you're watching this live, please join me and give a little bit of a clap for the moderating team because they definitely earned at least that much. They earned a lot more, but this is what we can do. Other than that, the concept of my streams is usually very simple. I like to talk with people. Like whenever I joined your stream, whenever I joined a lot of other people, it's always the discussion was between YouTubers and what YouTubers want and so on. And it's nice and all. Like there is a lot of place for that. But on my streams, we usually just talk with my chat with my community. So this is what I propose, right? I have my Q&A section where people are asking questions. So I'm going to bring up questions, and there's going to be topics, and we can talk, discuss. There is no time limits and so on. But so people, if you want your question read, please leave it in the Q&A section in the chat on YouTube. But in the meantime, there is one topic that I definitely need to ask you first and foremost, because I think uh, it's the thing that will probably define the 2025 is the new person that came in with potentially with the Trump administration, the special envoy to Ukraine, Kit Kellogg. He is some people say that he might be sort of a grown up in the room, so to say, compared to the other parts of the Trump administration. People are evaluating that he may be not the worst case for this scenario because it could be somewhat isolationist completely, where which one Kit Kellogg supposedly is not. And CNN recently took an interview with him where he talked about his plan that would be to freeze the conflict essentially, potentially give Russia a carrot by lifting some of the sanctions off of it, bring in some of the peacekeeping forces, and create some kind of a Korea-style scenario where the territories will be controlled by Russia, but the limiting line will be controlled by some neutral forces, the third-party forces, most likely Europeans at least. That's what's proposed. And then hopefully once Putin dies, then Ukraine maybe will sometimes hopefully get the territories back, but at least it's going to stop the war. So floor is yours. What do you think about this? Because you're the American here.
There was this rumor that Trump was going to appoint somebody, and I was waiting until somebody was named to talk about this. But Trump could have not taken this serious. If Trump wanted to, he could have appointed, Scott Ritter to this post to negotiate between Russia and Ukraine. That was my fear, but he took it serious and he appointed a very responsible, established person. General, he's a retired lieutenant general. You retain the title for the rest of your life. So General Kellogg, he's 80 years old. So, how many people in the room are going to be older than Trump when Trump has a meeting? And it's very few, but General Kellogg is going to be one of them at the age of 80. He fought in Vietnam. He fought in the Gulf War in Panama, and I'm all for an older gentleman who remembers the Cold War and what was at stake against the Russians and the evil empire, the Soviet Union. So General Keith Kellogg was involved in Trump's first administration between 2016 and 2020. He was actually Mike Pence's national security advisor. So the national security advisor for the vice president doesn't get to make any important decisions, but they sit in all the meetings. They have all the intelligence. There was a fear. I had a fear that Trump alienated so many people in the national security apparatus of America, H.R. McMaster, John Kelly, General Mattis, that perhaps none of these guys would be willing to join his administration for fear of what could happen in a second Trump presidency. But thankfully, these guys are showing up. They're having conversations with Trump. They're offering him good advice. Trump's still the decider. He's going to listen to these people, and he's going to listen to the wackos on the internet who promote conspiracies, and then Trump's going to have to make a decision. But at least I now know Trump is getting good, solid advice from established career military personnel. So what is General Kellogg's idea? And I think Trump picked him because he sounds tough and he has bold ideas. This idea of we're going to force Russia to the negotiating table with threats. If you don't sit down and talk about what a settlement or a freeze might look like, then we're going to give Ukraine overwhelming force. We're going to supply them even more than what the Biden administration did. You mentioned you saw a clip. I don't know if that was CNN, but I think that might have been the Fox News clip. And I didn't know who General Kellogg was 3 days ago, just being honest. There's so many retired admirals and generals in the United States. I can't know them all. But just that 5-minute clip, wow, I was impressed. He established right up front that the testing of this Orshnik intermediate range ballistic missile, don't be intimidated. Under no circumstances will Putin or the Russians use nuclear weapons. So that's the first important message he's delivering to Fox News, which generally has a more conservative, right-leaning Republican audience. And those are the people that we need to reach. We don't have to talk to Democrats. We already got them on our side. So first thing he's saying is, don't be intimidated by the Russians. Don't panic. Don't pull a Joe Rogan. The Russians are not going to start a nuclear war. And then the Fox News commentator asked him, well, what do you think about the approval of ATACMS and Storm Shadows on the territory of Russia? How can Joe Biden on his way out be, sabotaging Trump by making the situation worse? And General Kellogg pushed back saying, no, this is actually good for Trump. The fact that President Biden gave the green lights for ATACMS and Storm Shadows, this just gives Trump, when he negotiates, more leverage. The more capability we give to Ukraine today, ironically, under Biden, Trump can then come in and say, oh, Biden was the bad cop. I'm the good cop, Russia. Talk to me, deal with me, and I will tell the Ukrainians to stop doing this, or they can't do that, whatever. I'm not saying that'll happen, but it's a negotiating pressure point. There's no reason to fear this reversal in policy. It's not going to trigger a nuclear war, and it does give Trump more leverage to put pressure on the Russians to do something, whatever that will be determined in the future. But Overall, how he landed in the first 48 hours, very impressed. He has his own personal politics. I'm a single issue channel, single issue voter. I only care what he thinks about Ukraine. And he personally visited Ukraine in 2023. He supports Ukraine. He calls it a genocide. He says the Russians are the bad guys. So I'm very relieved that the top advisor to Donald Trump on this war now is somebody who knows Ukraine, understands Ukraine, who knows the Russians, and understands what's at stake. And Russia can't be allowed to continue these wars, basically.
I think, thank you. That was very insightful. And this is kind of what we note. Stephen Bendel here is also saying that he feels optimistic. Do you think he's fooling himself? Because I also kind of feel kind of optimistic.
So with MAGA, they're divided. So from our perspective, from your perspective, and from my perspective, we only think and care about one political issue, the war in Ukraine. But you have to remember, for MAGA, it's a coalition. It's a big tent party of people who all care about different things. And what opinions they have, some of them are not strong opinions, some of them are weak opinions. And what I think is happening right now is the war between Russia and Ukraine. I don't think this is a top 5 issue for MAGA or Trump. There are people pulling Donald Trump in every direction on every issue concerning domestic American politics, on top of what's happening in Syria, on top of what's happening with Israel and Iran, on top of what's happening with North Korea and China, and Trump starting a trade war with Mexico and Canada. Like, there's all these different issues that I think Trump wants to think about, have meetings about, and talk about more than Russia and Ukraine. So if he wants to just hand this issue off to the national security states that has the intelligence, that would be a golden scenario for me. But there is a battle. There are people in the MAGA influence sphere, people like Jackson Hinkle or retired General Michael Flynn, screw that guy, Scott Ritter. The biggest red flags was the appointment of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. He's pro Russia, but he's already been nixed. He's not going to be in the next administration. The other big concern is Tulsi Gabbard. She's basically in a cult, and she's a Syrian asset. But I don't think she's going to get approved. I think there's already 4 Republican senators who have said no. Now, Trump's still going to do the nomination process. He's going to say, hey, this is what my base wants. This is somebody who campaigned hard for me, endorsed me. I'm going to give her the nomination. But I do believe that the democratic institutions of the United States are holding back at the moment Trump's worst impulses. And I don't think Tulsi Gabbard's going to make it in. As far as the other people who have expressed pro-Russia opinions in the past, J.D. Vance is the vice president. The vice president has no power or say in anything. I'm sorry. And when you see all these pictures of Donald Trump at like the UFC fights, or what's happening in Mar-a-Lago, I don't see JD Vance. JD Vance is nowhere. It's RFK Jr., Elon Musk, Trump, the 3 musketeers, and JD Vance is nowhere to be seen. And then as far as people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, I'm sorry, but this new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, is not real. It's not a real job, and it doesn't affect foreign policy in any way. RFK Jr. is nuts, but Trump wants to put him in charge of health and human services. And I'm not saying that's a great scenario for me, but I don't think that should have any impact on Russia or Ukraine. So we're dodging bullets at the moment. And I think Trump is making solid picks as far as like Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. These are established, traditional, legacy Republicans that understand what's at stake in this war, and they're not just keyboard warriors promoting conspiracies to make money on social media. So this is good news. Yeah, this is actually very good news.
Yeah, pretty much. And I have a lot of opinion about it, and I will talk about it in some of my videos. So not to take your time, because you're the valuable guest here, and we want to hear the questions from the community. But I will tell you just shortly that yes, you're right on point. And the only thing I would note is that it seems that this notion of China is being so prevalent that a lot of the appointments of Trump as the specific people that have been voicing that China is our priority number one. And I think it is good for Ukraine because it opens a window for diplomacy to essentially explains like, well, Russia winning does not really benefit China. So with certain efforts, there is an option to get a relatively favorable scenario for Ukraine.
I do believe it's actually very disappointing as an American, but I think there's a lot of conservatives, Republicans, Trump supporters who just wanted to be in opposition to Joe Biden. Whatever Joe Biden wanted, whatever Joe Biden was doing, they just instinctively had a reflex to just say no or oppose it. So when you look at the votes for military aid for Ukraine the last three times, it's almost every Democrat because Biden's a Democrat and he's in charge. And then with the Republicans, it was like 50-50. And of the 50% voting against aid, were they just doing that because they're in opposition and they just want to oppose everything Biden says and does? Or do they actually believe that Russia is justified and Ukraine, NATO expansion, blah, blah, blah? So now that Republicans have all the power, they control all three branches of government. They have all the responsibility. So the language that we as commentators have to use, I've made this point in my last couple videos, but the talking points change. We're no longer talking about the importance and need for protecting democracy, human rights, sovereignty, the international rules-based order. That was a good argument, but it didn't persuade a lot of Republicans. So now with MAGA, we have to talk about strength and weakness and deterrence and the importance of making sure that Russia doesn't take these trillions in resources under the ground. I don't want it to be transactional. I don't want Ukraine to feel like anybody will take advantage of them, but Trump thinks in dollars. He thinks in, what's good for me, what's good for us. So this is language that I have to use going forward. We need to stop Russia from absorbing these 40 million people and trillions of dollars in resources because it's only going to make them stronger in the next war, potentially against a NATO country. These wars are not going to end. And the best chance we have to preventing deadlier future wars is to give Ukraine all the support today. That's a winning argument, I think, even for people who support Trump and MAGA. And that's the argument as an American. I understand you're not American. You can't really talk in the same language I can. But that's the argument we need to make the next 55 days, because I do think things are going to get ugly. Things are going to get probably worse and darker before this war ends. And we need MAGA on our side, at least for 2025.
So true. All right, let's pivot to a little bit of other question. It's going to be a bit weird because people ask different questions. But Isbliss is asking, I've noticed that the ruble has regained some of the value in the last 48 hours. Sorry, ruble, I mean ruble. It's the same. I consider it a trend. I wonder if Putin has decided to begin inflating the value through spending it once again. What's your thought? Because I know you're also pretty good with the economics.
Well, with price fluctuations for currency, there's a range within a couple days. It can go up 5%. It can go down 5%. That's normal, but you have to average it out. What is the weekly moving average? What is the monthly moving average or whatever? So I don't know what it's done in the last day, but I saw it hit $1 to 114 rubles, and it's fallen off a cliff. There's no saving it. The ruble strengthened in 2022 because the price of oil skyrocketed. Demand was still high globally for energy, and Russia actually made money in 2022. This was very unfortunate. But then, as central banks started raising interest rates to get inflation under control, the price of oil and energy came down. Russia wasn't making as much on their exports. I think Putin wanted to avoid that psychological barrier of $1 to 100 rubles. So Putin and the Russian central bank was using foreign reserves. They were using Chinese yuan and the remaining dollars and euros to buy their own currency to stabilize it, to control it. Putin wanted to get through his election. And then I think he also wanted to get through the November election here in the United States, but he just can't afford to do this anymore. Something really important to know about the wealth fund of Russia, is this was money that Putin's been saving up since 2012. And this wasn't money to fight a war. Kyiv was supposed to fall in 3 days. This 600 billion that Putin saved up as the wealth fund of Russia was supposed to secure Russia financially for the next 20 years, for the rest of Putin's remaining life. This was supposed to guarantee their pension system and stability in the face of sanctions. Putin and the Russians always knew that sanctions were coming for their full scale invasion of Ukraine. They weren't supposed to spend this money on the war. This money was supposed to make sure that Russia was solvent for the next 20 years. And the last 3 years, they've blown through. Well, they had half frozen by the G7, and then the remaining money, they've probably blown through about 2/3 of it. And long term, Russia is screwed. There's no hope for Russia. In the short term, we're just worried about helping Ukraine survive this onslaught.
True. A question from it's going to be interesting one because it talks a lot about both the media and media spaces is my big problem. But Thor Wilder is asking, is desertion a big problem in Ukraine? Is Associated Press just repeating Russian propaganda, or there is actual problem there?
I don't have any firsthand knowledge or experience. The only thing I can really draw from is a video I saw from John Sweeney. John Sweeney, the British author who spent a lot of time on the ground in Ukraine. He is a very extroverted and social guy and likes going to the bars, likes meeting up with the troops. And he made a video a couple weeks ago saying that it was bad, just the general mood and morale on the front. And it's not difficult to understand why. The onslaught is endless. The Russians use these meat wave of tactics all day, every day on all the fronts. The Russians just don't care about the lives of their soldiers. They send them out to die. And it's important for Ukrainians to know they've not been forgotten. They're not fighting for nothing. They still have our support. I think we really just need to get through this winter. We all have generally this period of seasonal depression when it's getting cold and dark and the year drags on. But I would say morale is tough as we finish year 3 of this war and start year 4. It's horrendous. But as far as what are the numbers, I have no idea.
I have some numbers to share. So by my numbers, then over the last, 3 years now, this war is going on, right? For over the last 3 years, Ukraine has approximately 100,000 cases, a bit less, of desertion that are known. But that is important because some people try to describe it that it's 100,000 in like the last month or something. And secondly, people try to describe that Ukraine is running low on the human resources. That is not true. Ukraine mobilized approximately 10% of their mobilization potential. They have plenty of mobilization resources, even if you consider the people that, quote unquote, run away from the country. There's still a lot of people that are in Ukraine that can fight and that are willing to fight. Biggest problem for Ukraine is that it's not just about manpower, just throwing in people like Russia does. It's also about training and equipping them. And that's where Ukraine is struggling a lot. Next question. How badly do you think Chinese and India is going to F Russia over with the collapse of their currency? And kind of follow up to that, do you think that the Russian economy is tanking right now? And do you think Russia can go on for much longer?
So China and India are not friends with the Russians. These people, they're state actors that operate in their own self-interest. Remaining neutral and not supporting Ukraine, continuing to do business with the Russians is in their state self-interest. That's why they're doing it. They're not helping Russia because that's in their self-interest. So yeah, if the situation in Russia deteriorates, India and China aren't going to bail them out. They're not going to help them. China has the most to gain, in my opinion, from a collapse of the Russian state. If they want to roll north and take back Outer Manchuria, or just take everything east of the Urals and just say this territory has been destabilized. This is a threat to China because if if there's loose nukes in this area and we're not sure who's in charge of them, then this affects our national security. China China is just looking for an opportunity, and uh, remaining neutral, playing both sides, is to their strength. Concerning how bad is the Russian economy, Ryan Macbeth is going full blast on his channels, saying that basically Russia can't stop the war. Putin has created this warrior middle class of people earning $2,000 a month. 2,000 US dollars, is an astronomical salary for the typical Russian. That's like 6 months or 4 or 5 months or something of their no a typical annual salary. And what happens if you stop the war? Are you going to keep paying all these guys? Are you going to keep them in service? That's very expensive for a frozen conflict where you basically created a new DMZ. So some of these guys are going to have to be released. All of them are going to have to take a pay cut. And I do think Putin, it's one problem at a time, but yeah, what happens when the war ends or slows down or is frozen and these hundreds of thousands of Russian men stop getting their money, their very enhanced paychecks, and they all have military training now, combat experience. They've all seen death and killed people, and now they're returning home to walk the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg. So there's a general concern there. And the wartime economy that Russia has created is not sustainable. It's a sugar rush. They're depleting the national wealth fund of Russia to pay for everything. But the share price of Gazprom right now is basically a penny stock. It's about 100 rubles. If Gazprom was on the New York Stock Exchange, it would be delisted for having such a low value. All of these companies are going insolvent. I saw a clip. I saw a clip of a Russian central bank meeting in which they were talking about the impact of 21% central bank rates on small businesses in Russia. Because often when you take an order, you're only paid like a third of the price up front. And small businesses in Russia have to borrow the rest. They have to borrow money to work for a year to manufacture or make whatever was ordered. Then on delivery, they receive the rest of the payment, and then they can pay back that small business loan. You can't do that with local Russian banks charging you 25% to make their margin on the central bank rate being 21. It's just it's a downward spiral and a disaster, and Putin has created an unsustainable economic model of this warrior middle class all making $2,000 a month, when that's going to end at some point. You just can't pay those guys that much forever.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm, for example, probably could be in favor in quote unquote freezing the conflict. Let's not delve in that for much, but like keeping the economic sanctions on Russia, because if Russia, for example, wants to keep their army still big for that, they would need to reinvade or something, or refight again. It would still cost them an arm and a leg just to keep up. It's really incredible just how much. Right now they're surviving essentially because their army is such a meat grinder, so they don't really have to pay as much to their soldiers, so to say. But talking about the potentially freezing war, coming back to the question, as I said, we're going to be jumping around a bit. There is a discussion about how many international soldiers would it actually take to make a DMZ around Ukraine, because Ukraine is huge. It's incredibly big. And if we take something like a ratio of soldiers that is present in North Korea, South Korea DMZ, then it would take about 1.5 million soldiers required to be essentially patrolling and stationed on that border between Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and so on. And question then is it cheaper than to support Ukraine so it wins? Or is it cheaper to maybe station this 1.5 million forces on the border with Russia, risking a potential conflict with NATO?
Anybody pushing the idea or talking about a DMZ sucks at geography. For the typical American, when you hear the word DMZ, you think, oh, I know of a DMZ in Korea that's been holding for 75, 80 years. Sounds like an easy way out. Sounds like a good idea. But the DMZ on the Korean Peninsula is only 250 kilometers long. It's not a huge amount of territory. There's ocean on both sides, so it's not an ideal situation, but it's managed to hold for 80 years because the geography is simple. The front line, Bryansk through Crimea, that's 1,800 kilometers. This is before you factor in the border with Belarus, which Russia did invade from 3 years ago. That would make it even longer. And then you have Transnistria. There's still 2,000 Russian troops in Moldova, technically putting up, some kind of threat to Ukraine from the west. So Ukraine really has Russian troops on three sides. The idea that you can freeze the conflict or have a DMZ when you factor in the entirety of the front line being over 2,500 kilometers, like this just isn't feasible. This isn't practical. And some people argue this is part of the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, to shrink their borders. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia's borders actually became longer. So when you think about the borders of the Soviet Union, what areas did they have to defend? When these 14 new Soviet republics were created, Russia's borders extended. Russia's borders became longer with their new Soviet republics, which is why I understand the argument. Peter Zion beats this drum all the time. Part of the reason why the Russians are doing this is because they want to get to defensible geographic barriers like they had under the Soviet Union, because the central plains of Asia, they're just too open. These are the horde lands. This is why the Mongolians were able to conquer, half the known world or whatever 1,000 years ago. It's because it's so easy to just drive your tanks or ride your horses across the open steppes. Um, but anybody talking about a freeze in the conflict or a DMZ, I mean, the manpower and cost would probably exceed what we're spending on the war today. It's so stupid. So we'll see. I mean, people are going to propose ideas. Let's take each one of them serious, but I'm skeptical at the moment.
Yeah, and I noted while you were talking, I noted a fun fact, because if the DMZ will be delimited by the current line of conflict, technically, if it's going to be manned by the NATO troops from the Ukrainian side, technically, then there will be NATO troops in the Kursk. So there will be NATO troops inside of Russia, so to say, if there is an agreement. So how Putin can come to this agreement, I am a little bit skeptical, and that's why there's some optimism about if Putin just.
The point you just made is why the Russians are trying so hard to get Kursk back before January 20th. They don't want to have this conversation of what about this territory in Russia that Ukraine currently controls. It's pretty funny. Yeah.
And this is actually answering the question, will Putin be annoyed by the Trump's proposal for peace? Can he even agree to that? That's exactly what we just discussed, because like how Putin will talk about this, it's even incredible. You know that things are happening in Syria. Like people are making memes right now. So Lunar Bloods here asking, Syrian regime will fall. Is this good for Ukraine? And essentially some people are memeing about that. Ukraine says we're going to open a new counteroffensive. And then the question is where? In Syria. And supposedly
in Aleppo?
Yeah. Is it good or bad?
Yeah. So Syria, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad would not be there. He would not be still in power in Damascus without the Russians' direct patronage. I know the Russians operate a naval base in Syria, which is their geopolitical interest. They want to have a presence in the Mediterranean Sea, as well as to use Syria as a base to project power into Africa. So it's a nice halfway point for the Russians to get gold and diamonds and cause coups in sub-Saharan Africa. But yeah, the Russians have to be opposed everywhere. I mean, this is death by 1,000 paper cuts. Anytime I see one of these African rebel groups taking out like a Wagner convoy or something in Africa, I cheer for those guys. I'm not saying they're good guys. Sometimes it's just bad guys killing bad guys in some of these regions, but if they want to target the Russians and kick them out of their country, that's good. That's good for Ukraine. That's good for us. Same is true with the Syrians and Bashar al-Assad. He's Putin's puppet, and I mean, Syria is a very sad state. Their civil war, if you want to call it that, has been going on for 12 years now, and millions of people have left the country and probably can never return. I don't know what kind of production as far as oil or gas or resources Syria was doing prior, but I can't imagine it's very good today. So Putin keeps Bashar al Assad alive for, once again, that geographic pressure point. Now, what's currently happening in Syria is that the Free Syrian Army is being backed by the Turks. So Turkey, which tries to, play both sides or say they're neutral, Turkey just does whatever they want. They don't care about NATO doctrine. They don't care about what the Ukrainians want or even what the Russians want. They just do every time what they think is in their own best interest. And they don't support Bashar al Assad. And they would rather some kind of government to take place that is more friendly or pro-Turkish. And yeah, they're Turkey's the one doing this right now. They're the ones funding and training and arming the Free Syrian Army to push back against Assad's forces. And yeah, they made some progress this week. And if it's bad for Russia, I support it.
Yeah, I don't think it's fully black and white in Syria with what the rebels are for, but we definitely know that weakening Assad is not going to be benefiting Russia. So yeah, I agree that I'm for. A couple of shout outs. Thanks to Stephen Bendel for 100 Norwegian kroners. Thanks to Double G for 10 pounds. Great work from both of you. Slava Ukraini. Ohms, thank you so much for 10 bucks. Cheers for we're an information war. 2 billionaires are taking over their waves in America. Beware. So that is something. I guess I can transition it to the question from Ohms. What do you think about billionaires more and more interested in controlling the media, controlling the narrative spaces? Information war has been neglected by a lot of NATO, and that's my big frustration that we are not fighting a lot of these hybrid threats. In the European Union, the hybrid threats are fought. They have a doctrine that they've written that we're gonna inform our citizen that the hybrid threats are ongoing, which is a bit silly. So how do you see this? Is it really a pressure for us to do something, or we can just deal with it?
It's oligarchy. It's oligarchy in the United States. These tech oligarchs they have god complexes. It's frightening how much power they have, how much influence people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Google and Microsoft. When you control people's data and information, you sometimes know them better than they know themselves, and they can weaponize this. They can use this to manipulate people. People are victims of their emotions and their desires and their insecurities, and places like TikTok and Instagram weaponize it. They know how to exploit you. They know how to make you spend money, and they know how to get you to think and act a certain way. And everyone has this hubris, like, I can't be affected. I know myself the best. I'm a free thinking, independent, strong person, so I can spend all day on Instagram and TikTok and I'll be fine. And those people are delusional. So what's happening here with these elections is the advent of a new information sphere. Social media is very, very recent. I remember when my university campus got Facebook in 2007, and it was a big deal. Like, everyone on campus was talking how big of a deal this was in 2007 that we got Facebook. That was the first experience I ever had with social media. I mean, prior to that, there was LiveJournal and AOL Chat and all that stuff, but you didn't get the feed, you didn't get the algorithm. And what is happening with our elections and our information sphere is, for the first time, the last couple of years, for the first time, a majority of people are getting their news and information from social media, not traditional media. In my opinion, traditional media, legacy media is dead. And I can explain to you exactly what happens in this 2024 election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. MAGA is all in on social media. Trump doesn't care about doing an interview with CBS 60 Minutes. It just doesn't matter anymore. Go on the podcasts, go on Theo Vaughn, go on Joe Rogan. That's where people are getting their information and news. They're forming their opinions. Whereas Kamala Harris rejected that. She went on Call Me Daddy or something. That she went on like one podcast that is well known and popular here in the United States, but instead made herself available to legacy traditional media. If you want to, you know, if you want to get on CNN or MSNBC for like 6 or 7 minutes to do a segment, that maybe a clip might go viral on social media, but nobody's watching CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News anymore. They still have their viewership. You can still splice up clips. Those clips can go viral on social media. But what happened is attack ads and mailers don't work anymore. In my opinion, if you've sat down with someone like Trump went on Joe Rogan for 2 or 3 hours or whatever, once you've sat down with someone and shared a conversation with them for 2 or 3 hours, a 30-second attack ad's not going to work anymore on legacy media. You've basically been inoculated. When Trump goes on Theo Von and you're a Theo Von fan, he's a very well-known comedian or whatever. Your friend, the host of the show, is basically introducing you to a new friend, and you build this connection, this relationship, this intimate experience over 2 or 3 hours. So spending $1 billion on mailers and attack ads isn't going to change somebody's mind. They're just going to say, these are lies from the deep state trying to attack my friend who I just had an intimate conversation with for 2 or 3 hours. So I think the Democrats have to realize this and embrace it. And they need to build up ethical, moral, responsible people in the social media sphere. Here in the United States, there's a couple personalities that are on YouTube. There's Brian Tyler Cohen and David Pakman. And Kamala Harris refused to talk to them or go on their shows or do a podcast with them because they just don't understand the importance or how the information sphere is shifted. And this is true to a certain extent in every country. What's happening in Romania right now with their elections, what's happening in Slovakia. I'm going to get the word out and I'm going to keep sharing my opinion on this. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what you think about this, Georgie.
No, for sure. The alternative media has shown it very clearly. Someone showed me the data. I'm a data guy. I love looking like at data, not really the headlines. Someone showed me the data saying that, the interview of Trump with Joe Rogan has been viewed for over 50 million times, and the DNC was viewed by 28 million people. That's like when there is
You're saying
podcast.
The DNC convention?
The DNC convention was viewed by 28 million people. Joe Rogan interview with Trump was viewed for over 50 million times. It's a rough data to grasp, but it's not a wild concept, right? It's just we talked that we're living in an information age, but no one kind of made it like, well, so what does it mean? That means that what we call the alternative media is media. That's what the only thing we need to change in our brains. It's not the alternative media, it's media. More current media, and I truly believe that everything that you say was pretty much on point, that this is the new environment and we need to adapt, and we need to also understand that it's also part of the warfare doctrines for a lot of militaries, including Russia. Arguably, Russia was there ahead of us.
Yeah, well, when you're blacklisted, the only thing you can do is alternative or social media. And I'll admit something to you now. Back in 2007, the early days of YouTube, I was watching RT News and Alex Jones because that was the only way for me to get information that was counter to the prevalent narrative. I was firmly against the American invasion of Iraq of 2003, and corporate media was terrible as far as controlling the information sphere and not allowing any dissenting voice about the war in Iraq. But if you went on YouTube, YouTube was a relatively new technology. I immediately found people like Alex Jones and RT News giving me the counter narrative. Now, as soon as Obama was elected in 2009, 2008, I noticed that RT News and Alex Jones were even harsher on Obama, and maybe some of it was justified in retrospect. So I stopped watching it, but I do remember that very early experience of something's not right. I feel like I'm being lied to by for-profit corporate media. I'm going to go on the internet and find some kind of countering opinion or information. And the Russians have always been there. collecting these people, feeding these people. And now that it's flipped, and I think a majority of people get their information from social media, there's no accountability. There's no gatekeepers. People can say the most insane, crazy things, and that's what draws a larger audience. If you just make the story grander and grander, that's how you grow your audience on social media. There are no editors, there are no fact checkers, there are no gatekeepers preventing bad information from getting out. It's a horrifying world, and I think it's going to take us a generation before we reject this new trend. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
For sure. Though I'm not completely against it. I'm for democracy while we understand democracy as it needs to go. Like it can change. Democracy's changed at the whole point of the system, while at least the system is going, right? I don't want our countries to turn into autocracies. But that's a whole different conversation. And instead, I would like to focus more on the questions that were asked from the audience. The things are happening in Georgia. Beatings, shooting down. You also mentioned Romania. A lot of things are happening. Moldova voted for European Union. We see some reallocation of powers. But right now in Georgia, it seems that after they lost the elections, they might be having their Maidan moment right now. And that's the question by Kanti Ludan. It's like, do you feel that there is a Maidan moment in Georgia? And do you feel that this is important?
I would say I hope there is. I would support that, but I don't. I'm not positive. I'm not optimistic that I don't think it takes a lot of money from Russia to purchase and control the government of Georgia, given their history and their proximity. Who's going to come to save or help Georgia if the Russians attack at this point? I mean, if the Western Alliance won't even do everything they can to fully support Ukraine, who's going to protect Georgia? So I think that's the perception that a lot of people in Georgia's government has, and is just take the path of least resistance, accept Russia's money, and pass the laws they want passed. Hope that you can maintain enough of your sovereignty to survive until Russia collapses, and then you can get your territory back, and you can finally be free of Russian influence. But at the moment, I think the majority within Georgia's government is just saying we just have to lay low, stay quiet, try and ride this out.
So true. Next question. I have no idea how to put it, so I'm just going to put it to you how it is, and you can take it on a face value. So the question is by B.R. Bodden. As a non-US citizen, could Jake Broe explain to us how this conversion of states in the United States Constitution can work as a non-democratic way of changing the US Constitution?
What are we trying to change?
So as far as I understood, the question is, how can this convention of states with inside the quotes in the US Constitution can be used as a non-democratic way of changing said US Constitution? That's what
So the US Constitution is insanely difficult to change. And I'll be honest, the founding fathers back in 1789, when they drafted the Constitution, they didn't really have a lot to base this on. I mean, they were talking about like ancient Greece to say, okay, let's look at previous examples of democracies and let's try and build something off of this. So they initially wanted, in order to change the Constitution, you need supermajorities in the House and the Senate, and then you need 3/4 of the state legislators to ratify it. It's very difficult to do. And there is an alternative way. There's like you can call for a constitutional convention in order to elect delegates to change the Constitution, but I don't even think that's ever been done. I'm trying to think if any of the amendments we made was through the convention process, and I honestly don't know U.S. history well enough to say that we've ever done that. So there are things. I'm trying to understand the question, and perhaps this individual is asking about the Electoral College. Why don't we just have a popular vote system to elect a president instead of the Electoral College electing delegates? Is there a way to change that? Because twice in the last 24 years, the person who got fewer votes became president. George Bush in 2000, Donald Trump in 2016. And I have talked about this in a Q&A I did. There is an initiative. I forget what it's called at the moment, but basically, state legislatures are independently passing this law saying once enough states have signed this compact, all of our delegates from our states will be awarded to the winner of the national popular vote. So it doesn't matter how the popular vote went in our states, we're going to assign our delegates to the winner of the national popular vote. As soon as enough states sign this compact and agree to it, they have the majority, then presidential candidates can just campaign whatever they want. Nobody should be defending the current system we have. The fact that there are 7 battleground states and the candidates only talk to people in 7 states, that's stupid. Why? It has nothing to do with a big state, small state, urban versus rural. What's a big swing state? Pennsylvania or something, 19 electoral votes, and then you've got Nevada at 5. Like it shouldn't be this way. Just let presidential candidates talk to people in Montana, talk to people in Washington State, talk to people in New York, California, Texas, wherever, and get your vote. Anyone defending the current system thinks they benefit from the system, and I don't support that.
Yes. Since we're having you as an American, I'm going to put the next question as American as well. And I'm going to skip a couple of questions, guys, because they're kind of coming back to the topics that we covered from different angle, but still. So the question is, and this is kind of the first one. The first part is you're a fundraising machine, and your voice is so important. Have you considered running for Senate? Because clearly you have the charisma and what's relevant to make yourself into Congress. And before you continue, could you also comment on the tariffs with Canada and Mexico that are coming? What could be the resolution? Do you think they will go well? What could happen?
Let's start with tariffs, and then we'll talk about my political future. So Trump says a lot of things and does not a lot of things. He views his megaphone. In America, we call it the bully pulpit. The president has the bully pulpit. And he says things to get a reaction. He says things to test ideas. He loves at his rallies just to toss out one-liners to see how the audience reactions. It's a focus group for him, basically. So this, I'm going to put 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada if they don't stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States. Okay, well, tariffs and economic policy are completely separate from drug enforcement, law enforcement actions. Like, you shouldn't be weaponizing the economy to get concessions on non-economic issues. But as far as the flow of fentanyl into the United States, you can just look at the numbers. The majority being brought in are being brought in through legal ports of entry by American citizens. What the hell is Mexico and Canada supposed to do to stop that from happening? So I don't think these tariffs are going to happen. I think Trump is just trying to scare people to get them to negotiate on some other issue. But a 25% import tariff on everything coming in from Mexico and Canada would destroy the United States. Uh, I'm sorry, but Americans are really not smart and they don't understand what a tariff is. Trump tries to frame it as we're going to make the other country pay money when they sell us stuff. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But what a tariff is basically a sales tax on anything imported from other countries. Tariffs can be beneficial when countries like China are subsidizing their own industries to dump in America's markets. So if the Chinese government is spending billions to subsidize their steel industry, steel is then being dumped on the American market at low rates that American companies can't compete with because they don't get the subsidies from the American government. Then you put a tariff on that to protect your own domestic industry. That's the only time tariffs really should be used. So a 25% across the board tariff would basically cause the price of everything in Walmart and Amazon to go up by more than 25% because the middlemen still have to make their margins. It would be an absolute disaster, which is why I don't think it'll actually happen, but Trump is making the threats to get concessions. So that's tariffs. As far as my political future, there is a House district that I'm looking at in Wisconsin that potentially I could run for the House of Representatives in 2026. Otherwise, in the state of Wisconsin, there's a Republican incumbent senator up for reelection in 2028. His name is Ron Johnson. I could potentially run against him for statewide office. But yeah, I'm just keeping my options open at the moment, and I am seriously considering it because I think it'd be a lot of fun. I mean, it'd be a lot of work. It would increase my profile, and with that comes, I think, security risks. Lack of, I would lose a lot of privacy, but yeah, I think I would make a good representative, and I'd be a good advocate for responsible policy and effective government.
We definitely could use your voice in there for sure, and I cannot support it. I'm a somewhat partial U.S. taxpayer, but I don't have any voice. But as a U.S. taxpayer, you should do that for sure. A couple callouts. One last question for you, and then you're gonna have the last kind of word, and you can say whatever you want to my community. I'm pretty sure a lot of your community here as well. So first things first, thank you for 100 Norwegian kroners to Jesus. It's good that we're supported by Jesus here. It's really appreciated.
Well, it could be Jesus.
From Norway, pretty sure it's like Jesus, maybe like this. But yes, thank you to Jesus for that. Blonde Bombshell, hello. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the streams. Thank you so much for moderating the streams on some other channels I've seen. Great to see Jake here. I'd vote for him, you see. Eduardo Guerrero, thank you so much for Mexican. Is it pesos? 50 pesos? Yeah, peso. Hi from Mexico. Believe it or not, Trump helps the democratic society here by being the current pro-Russian, Cuban, Venezuelan regime boogeyman. Maybe for sure. Jake, maybe take it in the last word if he finds it relevant. And the last question, because the time is really running out, is Ukraine really went to South Korea to have a talks about potential for supply of weapons. South Korea can be a big supporter for Ukraine and can really boost their capabilities. And we were really hoping for this. The unfortunate answer that we're hearing right now is that Ukraine was not successful because there is a law that prohibits selling of weapons to the countries at war, and supposedly current government party in South Korea is not that relevant. Now, my knowledge of South Korea, North Korea is a little bit there. Like I can say "안녕하세요," or it's like "감사합니다." That's pretty much where my language knowledge is. But I did work to help a lot of the escapees from North Korea before Ukraine really took over a lot of my focus. So question to you, because you have been very involved with South Korea, you know them, you've been there personally. What's your take on it? What's the situation? And can we expect that some kind of help will be coming from South Korea now that North Korea is so closely engaged?
I think North Korea's government wants to send military aid, but I don't think there's any appetite or support from the Korean people. I did see a poll from Yonhap News in South Korea that something like 80% of South Koreans, when polled, oppose sending military aid to Ukraine. And I think for people just thinking about, pieces on a chessboard, they're like, "Oh wait, North Korea and South Korea fought a war. They're enemies. If North Korea is helping Russia, then South Korea should want to help Ukraine." Unfortunately, that's not the dynamic on the Korean Peninsula. They're one people with one history, one language, one culture. The South Koreans don't hate the North Koreans. Like, it's not like other ancient rivalries around the world, like India and Pakistan or whatever. They're the same people, and they don't wish them any harm. They don't want to kill them. There's no blood feud. They hate the Kim regime. They hate the Kim dynasty. They want the Kim regime to collapse and be destroyed, and for those people to have very bad things happen to them because they're evil people. But no, there's no appetite for war in the South to annihilate or destroy the North. Those are their relatives. Those are their blood kin. They still share a history and a language and a very intimate geography, being on a peninsula, basically. So it'd be a very tough sell for the South Korean government, even though I do think they want to get their people excited about sending weapons to Ukraine. Now, South Korea still does plenty of other things. They are at the moment sending advisors and people to basically Uh, well, they're sharing intelligence, and as soon as any of these North Koreans in Russia get captured, they'll be interrogated or talked to by the South Korean officials to gather intelligence. And South Korea is happy to share with Ukraine whatever they can. For the last 3 years, South Korea has been doing things behind the scenes, transferring artillery to America's stockpiles to free up inventory so America can send to Ukraine. Everything South Korea does with Poland and their defense production for tanks or whatever, that all benefits Ukraine as well indirectly. So the South Korean government for the last 3 years has been doing everything they can indirectly. They're also providing humanitarian relief and financial aid. They don't have to. They're not part of the G7, but they're choosing to. So I do want to give them credit. But as far as people, saying, well, it's World War III, we got to pick sides, everybody saddle up. There's no appetite for war in the South. They don't want to do it. And I understand why.
For sure, and a lot of people really they kind of don't fully know the history of Korea and how much that the nation, both North and South, have suffered from different regimes, foreign invaders, and so on. A lot of the history of North Koreans can only be compared to something like Baltics or something like where there was just a population that was essentially always controlled by someone else, and someone else was imposing their dictatorship on
Can I
them.
share with you one of my favorite statistics that I learned while I lived in South Korea?
Sure,
Um,
and this could be the start of your last word. Just what you feel, and
so
finish how you will.
the bombings, the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on 2 Japanese cities. Do you know roughly how many people estimated died? Within the first 72 hours or whatever.
No, I don't have it on top of my head. I'm sorry.
It's about 200,000 people. About 100,000 killed in Hiroshima. 3 days later, another 100,000 killed in Nagasaki. Of those 200,000, how many of them were Japanese? These were 2 Japanese cities that were killed. It's only
Let's
estimated about 120,000, meaning the other 80,000 were Koreans. These were forced laborers. These were domestic workers taken from the Korean peninsula to basically be feudal slaves in Imperial Japan. So when I learned that when the United States bombed Japan to end World War II, we killed 80,000 Koreans, and that just blew my mind. And Korea obviously has no reason to hold it against the United States. This was their opportunity for liberation, but I just think it's staggering. Yeah, I mean, Japan moved on the peninsula in the late 1890s, annexed it, and Korea was occupied for over half a century. And the Japanese were not very kind to the Koreans during that period.
guys, if you think the war in Ukraine is brutal, do not read about what happened in Korea during the Japanese invasion. Like you're gonna have nightmares. And I'm talking this as a guy that's seen drone footage of people being completely torn apart.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jake, you've been a great supporter of Ukraine. You've gotten a lot of exposure. You've been invited to the shows. You've been invited to this show, and it's my pleasure. You are the person why I started doing a lot of these. Like I still remember when the war just started, I was just looking at the streams, and your stream was one of those that covered the war at the beginning and gave me a lot of perspective from the Western side to see how people outside my Eastern European bubble are perceiving this war. So thank you so much for this. But if there is something you want to say to our community to round this all up, and I'm pretty sure everyone will tell you thanks from our side. What do you feel? Do you have any plans, more fundraisers, whatever you want?
I just want to let people know, if you're tired, I understand. But I guarantee you, the people in Russia, the Russian forces are more tired. As difficult as we know it is for our side, for Ukraine at the moment, the Russians are hurting more. Everything in Russia is infinitely worse. The problem is that not as much information gets out because the information sphere in Russia is controlled so tightly, since they don't have the freedom to dissent, the freedom to protest, the freedom to object, sometimes the freedom to resist. Whereas in the West, we do. We do have freedom. That's what this war is about. Can Ukraine maintain its independence and remain free? Can they join The Western Democratic Alliance that respects human rights, respects international law, has, Ukraine's government is not perfect, but it wants to improve. It wants to get better. This is what the Ukrainian people want. And Russia is not offering anything different than what the Russians have offered the world for centuries now. Brutalization, corruption, death. We're close. This is the closest I think the world has gotten in the last couple hundred years to finally putting the dagger in the heart of Russia and ending this. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like when Russia has a political crisis or an economic collapse. We're going to go through this together. But I'm going to be the advocate that the world is going to be a better place if we can just finish off the Russians this year, 2025. So keep liking, keep commenting, keep giving donations, and offering your support in any way you can. You're part of this global movement, and you do make a difference.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, everyone that is watching this stream. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and we'll see you next time.
Glory to the heroes.
Heroem Slava. There we go.